The quiet hum of the psychiatric hospital was almost soothing. The sound of soft footsteps echoing through the sterile halls, the occasional murmur of a nurse or orderly speaking in hushed tones, and the rhythmic tapping of a typewriter in the office, all blended into a symphony of calm. But none of it could dull the sense of anticipation that was hanging in the air, like the calm before a storm. In the far corner of the hospital, behind a set of double doors marked with a simple therapy animal zone, a German shepherd named Max lay on a bed of soft blankets, his eyes sharp and alert. Max wasn't your ordinary dog. He was a trained therapy animal, one of the few dogs in the country specifically trained to work with patients suffering from PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. His instincts were finely tuned, his training impeccable, and his bond with the patients was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Max had been here for almost 3 years, building a reputation for himself as a comforting presence, a gentle soul, who could read the hearts of those in need. His handler, Dr. Emily Harris, was a soft-spoken psychiatrist who worked closely with Max to help the patients. Together, they made an extraordinary team, one that could ease the pain of even the most troubled souls. Today, however, something felt different. A new patient had arrived. Her name was Rachel Simmons, and Dr. Harris had briefed Max on the details. Before bringing her into the therapy room, Rachel was a young woman, mid-20s, quiet and withdrawn, with deep-set eyes that seemed to carry a heavy burden. She had been referred to the hospital after a series of disturbing outbursts and hallucinations that had put her and others in danger. Dr. Harris knew that Max's intuition would be invaluable in helping Rachel. Max had never let her down before. But there was something in the air today, an unspoken tension that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand up. It was as if the universe was warning her that Rachel's case would be unlike any they'd handled before. As Rachel entered the room, her posture was stiff, her eyes wary. Max, who had been lying on his bed, immediately stood up and moved toward her, his tail wagging gently. Rachel hesitated, her gaze flicking from the dog to Dr. Harris and back. "This is Max," Dr. Harris said softly, her voice calming. "He's here to help you. I promise you, he's one of the best at what he does." Rachel's lips twitched into something like a smile, but there was a faint unease behind it. She slowly extended her hand toward Max, who sniffed her fingers before giving her hand a soft, reassuring lick. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment it felt like time stopped. Max wasn't just a dog. He was something more, something that could see beyond the surface into the very heart of a person. Rachel flinched, as if something deep inside her had just been stirred. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she looked as though she might retreat, but she didn't. Instead, she sank down onto the couch in the corner of the room, her eyes fixed on Max. Dr. Harris watched the interaction carefully, noticing the subtle shift in Rachel's expression. Something was happening. Max wasn't just responding to Rachel's anxiety, he was sensing something deeper, a shadow that Rachel was desperately trying to keep buried. "Rachel," Dr. Harris said gently, sitting beside her, "you don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to, but I do want you to know that Max is here for you. If you feel like talking, he's a very good listener." Rachel blinked, but the wall she had so carefully built around herself remained intact. She wasn't ready to talk, not yet. Max, however, was different. He had already begun to pace slowly around the room, his nose to the floor, his ears perked, his eyes narrowing. Something was off. He could feel it in his bones. Something about Rachel was triggering his instincts. Something dark, something dangerous. Max's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Dr. Harris furrowed her brow, watching as Max continued his slow, methodical movements around the room. He never acted like this with new patients, not unless there was something serious, something that needed to be uncovered. She gave Rachel a sidelong glance, watching as the young woman seemed to grow more and more uncomfortable with each step Max took. The tension in the room was palpable, and it wasn't just from Rachel. Max was reacting to something that neither of them could see, but that he could sense in a way only he could. "Max," Emily called softly, trying to bring him back. "Come here, boy." Max paused for a moment, his nose hovering over a spot on the carpet near Rachel's feet. He didn't respond to Dr. Harris's call immediately. His eyes locked on Rachel with an intensity that made Emily's heart skip a beat. Rachel's gaze darted nervously to Max, her body stiffening. She looked away quickly, clearly uncomfortable. "Is he always like this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Harris frowned. "Max is very in tune with people's emotions, Rachel. He's trying to understand how you're feeling, and sometimes he can sense things that we can't." Rachel's fingers twitched at her side, and for a split second, Emily could have sworn she saw a flash of fear in her eyes. Fear of what? What was Rachel hiding? Max's behavior was becoming more erratic, and Emily knew that something wasn't right. He was reacting to something in the room, something that Rachel was hiding. The sound of the hospital's clock ticking seemed to grow louder as the seconds stretched into minutes. Emily's pulse quickened, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. "Rachel," Emily said quietly, trying to coax her into speaking, "I want you to take a deep breath. You're safe here. Max is here to help." Rachel's chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled to control her breathing. She wasn't ready to open up. Not yet. But Max was. And in his own quiet, intuitive way, he would find the truth. The next day, Dr. Harris arrived early to the hospital. Max was already waiting for her by the door, his tail wagging slowly as he anticipated the start of another day. But today felt different. He was quieter than usual, his body tense, as though he knew something was coming. Emily glanced down at him, feeling the weight of his silent concern. "Come on, boy," she murmured, taking her seat at her desk. "We've got work to do." Max's head tilted as if he understood, and he padded silently to the door, his paws clicking softly against the polished floor. Emily's mind was preoccupied as she reviewed Rachel's case file, her eyes scanning the notes from the previous day. Nothing about the young woman's history screamed danger, but Emily's gut told her something wasn't right. It was in the way Rachel hesitated when she spoke, the way her eyes darted around as though looking for an escape, and then there was Max. The bond they shared wasn't just one of companionship, it was one of deep understanding. He'd sensed something yesterday, something that Rachel had locked away. But what was it? What dark secret was she harboring? When Rachel arrived for her next session, her shoulders were hunched, her head lowered. She moved slowly, as though the weight of her own thoughts were dragging her down. Max watched her carefully as she entered, his eyes narrowing, his posture shifting from casual to alert. "Morning, Rachel," Dr. Harris greeted, her tone warm but professional. She gestured to the chair across from her. "How are you feeling today?" Rachel's lips parted as though she might speak, but no words came. She just stared at Dr. Harris, her eyes clouded with something Emily couldn't quite place. Fear, sadness, maybe both. Max, sensing the emotional distance in the room, rose to his feet and walked over to Rachel, his large paws moving silently across the floor. He stopped just in front of her, his dark eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, Rachel hesitated. Then slowly, she reached out and touched his head. At the contact, Max's entire body stiffened. His ears flicked forward, his eyes widened slightly, and his nostrils flared as though he was inhaling something unfamiliar. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second before he abruptly stepped back, his body tense. Dr. Harris watched Max closely. He had reacted to Rachel's touch. Something had triggered him. "Rachel," Emily said, her voice soft but firm, "can you tell me what you're feeling right now?" Rachel's fingers tightened around the armrest of the chair, her knuckles going white. I don't know," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice was shaky, and her eyes flickered toward the door as if she were considering leaving. Max, sensing her rising anxiety, padded toward her once more. This time, he stopped beside her chair and sat down, watching her with a quiet intensity. His gaze was unyielding, and though he didn't bark or whine, his presence was powerful. It was as though he was silently telling Rachel that she couldn't run from this, not anymore. For a long moment, Rachel remained silent, her hands gripping the chair. Max didn't move. He was waiting for something he had sensed. "From the very beginning, I know this is difficult," Dr. Harris said, her tone gentle. "But sometimes it helps to talk. You're not alone here." Rachel's breath caught in her throat, her eyes squeezing shut. She shifted uncomfortably, her body rigid with fear. It was clear now that whatever was troubling her, it was more than just anxiety. There was something deeper, a trauma that went beyond the walls of this hospital. I'm not who you think I am," Rachel finally whispered, her voice trembling. She shook her head, as if trying to banish the words that had slipped from her mouth. "I didn't want anyone to know." Max's ears twitched at the shift in her voice, his attention entirely focused on her. There it was, the first crack in the wall Rachel had built around herself. She had something to say, but she wasn't ready to say it yet. "What do you mean, Rachel?" Emily asked, her voice gentle but insistent. She knew this was the moment when everything could change. If Rachel was willing to share her secret, they could finally begin to help her. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but before any more words could escape, there was a loud sound from the hallway, a voice, followed by hurried footsteps. "Rachel, are you in here?" The voice was male, deep and commanding. Rachel's face went pale and her body went rigid. Her eyes shot toward the door, and she quickly stood up, backing away as though she'd seen a ghost. "Rachel?" Dr. Harris asked, standing as well, confusion flooding her voice. She looked toward the door, but before she could say anything, further the door swung open. A tall man in his early 30s stepped into the room. His face was sharp, his expression cold. He wore a black jacket, a shadow of authority hanging over him. "I'm sorry," the man said, his gaze flicking from Rachel to Dr. Harris. "I need to speak with her." Rachel looked at the man, her body trembling. There was fear in her eyes, the kind that told Emily this wasn't just a random visitor. This man was part of her past, a past that was clearly haunting her. But who was he? "Who are you, Doctor?" Harris asked, her voice firm but not unfriendly. She stood between the man and Rachel, sensing that this was not a social visit. "I'm Officer Harris," the man said, his tone clipped. "I'm here to ask Rachel a few questions." Rachel's face drained of color as she backed further into the room. She cast a quick glance at Max, and for the first time, Emily saw the raw terror in her eyes. Max's instincts went into overdrive. His body stiffened, and his tail, which had been wagging gently moments before, dropped between his legs. He watched Officer Harris intently, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Something was wrong. This man was not who he seemed to be. Dr. Harris stepped closer to Rachel, sensing her panic. "Rachel, what's going on?" she asked gently. "Who is this man to you?" Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes filling with unshed tears. He's part of the reason I'm here," she whispered, barely audible. "He's the reason I ran." Suddenly Max's hackles stood up, and he growled low in his throat, his focus entirely on Officer Harris. Max's low growl reverberated through the room, cutting the thick tension like a knife. His body was rigid, ears flat against his head, and eyes locked onto Officer Harris. Dr. Harris looked between Rachel, who was visibly trembling, and the officer, whose expression remained unreadable. "Max," Dr. Harris said softly, trying to steady the situation. "It's okay. She reached down to touch the German shepherd's broad head, her fingers brushing through his fur. But Max didn't relax. He only growled again, more forcefully this time. Officer Harris took a step back, clearly sensing the dog's reaction. His eyes flicked to Max, then back to Dr. Harris. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I assure you I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice steady but cold. "I'm just here to ask Rachel a few questions regarding an ongoing investigation. I'm not here to hurt her." Rachel's breathing was shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. She refused to meet the officer's gaze, her eyes darting between him and Dr. Harris. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Max had never been this protective of anyone before. Something was wrong, something far beyond the simple presence of an officer. "Rachel, you don't have to speak to him if you don't want to," Dr. Harris said, turning toward the young woman. "You're safe here." But Rachel didn't seem reassured. Instead, she took a step back, her eyes wide with panic. "I didn't want to come here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to face him, not like this." Dr. Harris turned back to Officer Harris, her brow furrowing. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice taking on an edge of authority. "Who are you? Really? What is this about?" Officer Harris hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then he sighed, deeply, as if deciding there was no turning back. "You're right to be cautious," he said, his voice dropping to a lower tone. "But I'm afraid Rachel might be involved in something much darker than she realizes. This isn't just a routine check-in. We're investigating a string of disappearances, and we believe she might have been a witness to something very important." Rachel's face went white as a sheet, her eyes wide with terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She stumbled back against the wall, as though the room were closing in on her. Max immediately moved to her side, his body leaning against her for support, his eyes never leaving the officer. "What do you mean?" Dr. Harris asked, her voice now filled with concern. "Rachel doesn't know anything about disappearances. She's been here for a reason. She's been trying to heal." "I'm afraid that healing might be more complicated than you think," Officer Harris said, his voice tight. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Rachel was involved in an incident years ago, an incident that might be connected to the people who are still missing. She witnessed something, but she's been blocking it out." Dr. Harris looked at Rachel, a mixture of confusion and concern washing over her. "Rachel, is this true?" she asked gently. "Is there something you've been hiding?" Rachel didn't respond right away. She stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide, as though she were trapped in a memory she couldn't escape. The quiet hum of the hospital felt deafening in that moment. Dr. Harris could sense the weight of the secret Rachel was carrying, something deep and dangerous that she had buried for years. "I didn't want to remember," Rachel finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought if I just kept running it would all go away, but it's never really gone." Max pressed his head against her side, his body warm and steady. He could feel the terror radiating off her, and his body instinctively shifted into protector mode. Dr. Harris stepped closer to Rachel, her hand gently resting on the young woman's shoulder. "What happened, Rachel?" Dr. Harris asked softly. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together. You don't have to face this alone." Rachel's eyes darted to Officer Harris, her lips trembling. "I saw them," she whispered. "The men who took them. The ones who made them disappear." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and the room seemed to get smaller. Dr. Harris's stomach twisted with unease, and even Max, normally unshakable, let out a low whine. "Rachel," Officer Harris interjected, his voice suddenly urgent. "What did you see? Who were they?" Rachel squeezed her eyes shut as the memories crashed back in full force. Her breath caught in her throat, and her body trembled violently. The events she had tried to suppress for so long were flooding her mind, and she couldn't stop them. The faces, the whispers, the dark figures in the woods, everything was coming back. I was just a kid, Rachel whispered. It was so long ago, but I saw them. I saw their faces. I know who they are. Max's posture shifted as he noticed the change in Rachel's breathing. She was slipping into a panic attack, the memories too overwhelming to process all at once. He nudged her gently with his nose, but she didn't respond. "Rachel," Dr. Harris said urgently, "you're safe. You're here with us. You don't have to go back to that place." But Rachel wasn't listening. She was back there, back in the forest, back in the place she'd tried so hard to forget. Max's heart raced as he saw the terror in her eyes. She needed help, and fast. "Max, help her," Dr. Harris said, her voice filled with command. "Rachel, look at me. Focus on Max. Look into his eyes." Max stood tall, his gaze steady and calming as he moved closer to Rachel. He placed his paws gently on her lap, his weight reassuring, his presence grounding. Slowly, Rachel's frantic breathing began to slow, and her trembling hands stilled. "Focus on Max," Dr. Harris repeated. "You're safe here. Max won't let anything hurt you." Rachel's breathing steadied, and she finally opened her eyes, locking eyes with Max. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was only the bond between her and the dog, a silent communication between them that transcended words. Max's eyes were filled with understanding, and in that moment, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope, a hope she hadn't felt in years. "I remember," she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "I remember what I saw. The men who took them, they were part of something bigger, a network of people. I think they're still out there." Dr. Harris's heart raced as she processed Rachel's words. This was it, the breakthrough. Rachel was remembering the truth, and it was more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. "We'll protect you," Dr. Harris said firmly. "But you need to tell us everything. We need to know what you remember, Rachel. It's the only way we can help." The tension in the room was palpable as Rachel finally gathered herself enough to speak. Max stood beside her, his body still protective, eyes trained on the officer, then back on Rachel. He could sense that the words she was about to speak were as heavy as the secrets she had buried for so long. "I didn't want to remember," Rachel began, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I thought if I just kept blocking it out, it would go away. But it never did, not really. The nightmares, the flashbacks, they've haunted me for years." Dr. Harris and Officer Harris listened intently, neither of them interrupting as Rachel's words spilled out, the weight of her confession sinking into the air like a storm cloud. "I was 11 when it happened," Rachel continued, her eyes unfocused as if she were seeing the past through a fog. "I went camping with my family. It was supposed to be fun, a weekend in the woods to get away from everything, but we never made it back." Max's ears perked up at the mention of the woods, his instinct growing more alert. He had heard Rachel mention the woods before, each, a time with increasing anxiety, as if it were the root of all her fears. "Someone was watching us," Rachel said, her hands trembling in her lap. "I didn't know who at the time, but they were always there. I heard footsteps in the woods at night, saw shadows moving just beyond the campfire light. My parents tried to reassure me. They thought it was animals, but I knew it wasn't." "Officer." Harris took a cautious step closer, sensing that Rachel was nearing the truth. His voice was gentle, coaxing. "What happened next, Rachel? You're safe now." Her eyes flicked to Officer Harris and then back to Max. She seemed to draw strength from the dog's calm presence. The silence stretched between them before she spoke again, her voice tight with emotion. "They came in the middle of the night," she said, her voice shaking. "I woke up to hear muffled voices I didn't recognize. I didn't understand what they were saying, but the tone, it wasn't good. My dad tried to protect us, but they—" She paused, her face contorting with the memory. "They took him. They dragged him away from the campsite. And my mom, she fought. She tried to stop them, but they killed her." Rachel choked on the words, her body trembling with the weight of the memory. Max whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose, as though trying to soothe her. "It's okay," Dr. Harris whispered, her voice warm, comforting. "You're safe now. You're here with us." Rachel took a deep, shaky breath, her hands gripping Max's fur like a lifeline. "I ran. I hid in the woods. I don't know how long I was there. It was hours, maybe longer. But they were looking for me, too. I saw them in the distance. They knew I'd seen everything. They knew I was a witness." Dr. Harris felt a chill run through her, not from the cold air, but from the realization that Rachel wasn't just recounting a tragic memory. She was describing a nightmare that was still alive and hunting her. She had witnessed something terrible, and now it was clear that the people involved weren't done with her yet. "They came back for me," Rachel continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I thought I was going to die, but then they were gone, just like that. I don't know why they left me. I don't know how I survived, but I was found days later, lost in the woods, alone." Max barked once, his body tensing as if he were hearing something on the wind. The hairs along his back stood up, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Rachel's eyes darted nervously toward the door, and she clutched Max tighter. "They didn't just leave me," she said, her voice shaking. "They wanted me to remember. They wanted me to suffer. They put something in my head. A signal. A command. They could find me again if they needed to." The silence in the room was suffocating. Dr. Harris glanced at Officer Harris, who seemed equally shaken by Rachel's words. It was as if she had opened a door to something that was meant to stay shut forever. "We need to find them," Officer Harris said, his voice sharp. "Whoever they are, wherever they are. We can't let them hurt anyone else." Dr. Harris nodded, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Rachel, if they could find you then, they might still be looking for you now. What happened to them? To the people who took you?" Rachel's eyes flicked to the officer, then to Dr. Harris. "I don't know. I don't think they ever got caught. After I was found, I was placed in a group home, and I was never told what happened to my parents, what happened to those men. But I heard whispers, people in town talking about disappearances, about something bigger than just what happened to me." Officer Harris straightened, as if an idea had clicked into place. "That's it, the disappearances. They're not random. They're connected. They've been taking people for years." Rachel nodded, her face pale with fear. "And they'll keep doing it until they get what they want." Max growled low again, as though warning of an imminent threat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. His protective instincts had been set into overdrive. Dr. Harris took a step forward. "Rachel, I know it's hard, but you've just uncovered something huge. This isn't just about your past, it's about protecting people right now. You need to help us find out who these people are. Max and I will help you every step of the way." Rachel looked at Max, his steady gaze locking with hers. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of security, a flicker of hope that with Max's help, they might be able to finally unravel the truth and stop the darkness that had been haunting her. "I'll do it," Rachel whispered. "For my parents, for the others. I'll help you." The door to the room opened suddenly, and a nurse stepped inside, her eyes wide with concern. "Dr. Harris, Officer Harris, there's someone here to see you." Dr. Harris looked up, startled, as the nurse stepped aside, revealing a tall figure in the doorway, a man wearing a dark suit and a pair of sunglasses. His face was obscured by shadow, but the look in his eyes made it clear this was no ordinary visitor.